ready.
I felt lost at the picnic.
The picnic, the original picnic, was a terrible, terrible feeling.
I felt extremely isolated.
Here were 30 or 40 other people who presumably were there for the same reasons that I was.
I looked at all these people, all these different people, and didn't see anyone that looked like they had anything in common with me.
I didn't feel in the least bit compelled to try to talk to anyone for a long time.
The teachers you have just heard met the same awkward and lonely feelings which many youngsters have their first day of school. The picnic takes place on the first day of an 8-week teacher training program, which you are about to see. As a means of beginning team building and exposing teachers to learning through experience, we have an orientation in an austere and basic setting. In our case, this happens to be the woods and hills of New Hampshire, though it could happen as well on the plains, desert, or coast. But why remove teachers from campus for an orientation week? It is a deliberate attempt to remove them from their familiar and comfortable environment in order to bring them together as a cohesive community as quickly and intensively as possible. An austere and basic setting removes them from the distractions of the typical campus, removes them, in fact, from excuses for not being together. This community of 30 teachers will be the faculty of a 6-week summer school for 200 youngsters. And as the teaching is to be done in teams and through activity-centered learning, it is important that the many events of the first week create an atmosphere of a willingness to share, an acceptance of differences, and a basic understanding of the learning approach we are fostering. Orienteering, map and compass, kid stuff, Boy Scouts. Orienteering, the art of knowing where you are and where you're going. That's the metaphor. What can happen? The person who has the compass might have all the power. The person who can conceptualize from the one-dimensional map to the three-dimensional terrain might have all the power. But what does this have to do with teaching? The person with knowledge of the compass, like the teacher with knowledge about a particular subject, has choices as to how that power will be shared. Does the person with a compass say, "I know how to get us through, I'll lead"? Or does he ask the question, would anyone else like to learn how to use it? In this particular case, learning to share power with peers in a very real problem-solving situation accentuates the team-building process.
As you and Jeff and I and John last summer started to think about what we could teach, it was beautiful to me to think of, hey, teachers don't have to be the experts. Yet if we have the enthusiasm and interest, there are a lot of things we could teach. Aha, terrariums. And as I stood there and pointed to a chalkboard, which was not a natural skill, where did I ever acquire using a chalkboard? Yet that's like second nature to me. The art of questioning, the ability to hear what students are saying, the subtle use of eye contact, all these things that you grow into as a teacher. To be able to experience that and consciously share it with others gives oneself a sense of self-worth and makes me feel that the gift of teaching another is one of the greatest gifts we can have And for classroom teachers to have the environment that is safe for them to teach others and give them the gifts they have is something that we don't do enough of. And as I think of our program, has started just to scratch the surface of that. The old idea for me of being a teacher as a fixed entity who has a store of knowledge that goes out and teaches now is just so dead, so draining, that idea. Because the idea of being a teacher is being a learner. And a learner is a process. And that process is life-giving. And each year is like a new journey. So teaching terrariums is symbolically, for me, one small act of what every teacher could teach another teacher, and grow in their own capacity and their own self-worth, and not dead end in their teaching careers.
When a teacher arrives at an unfamiliar and challenging learning situation, such as rock climbing, it's in many ways like the youngster faced with a new set of basal readers. The base of the rock cliff, for some, raise that same feeling the unsuccessful reader has. Can I do it? What if I fail? And for teachers, who characteristically have experienced mostly success in school, the possibility of failing and being exposed as a failure in front of peers adds an important dimension to the potential learning. Of course, you don't need a rock cliff to demonstrate this. Even the seemingly simple task of tying a knot offers the chance to realize the frustration which arises from feeling inept.
Okay.
Thank you.
Through the
Did
hole,
they leave you ready?
behind the tree, under the tree.
Huh?
Okay, and through the
Back
hole
down
again.
through the hole.
You might.
I have a lot of strong emotional feelings about rock climbing because that's something that has become fairly central to my life. The thing that I learned most from that activity is about myself. What happens to me in a situation that is stressful, that may be occasionally uncomfortable? How do I operate? How do I function under conditions that might prove to make you dysfunctional? I think it's important for people to have some experiences like that. One of the things that I mentioned last night is that I feel like in this society, most people go through their lives and almost everything is negotiable. People get very accustomed to making deals. They get very accustomed to bargaining with people and with situations. And I think it's really important. I think it's a good learning exercise to have a situation that isn't negotiable, where things are very concrete, they're very real, and solutions are, they either do exist or they don't exist. And those sort of either-or exercises are sometimes pretty good for people to deal with.
When we went to the climbing area and we saw the cliffs from the road, they didn't look very big, and I wasn't very scared. And as we got up closer to the cliffs, and Mike started talking to us about what we were going to be doing, and when he climbed up to the top, I began feeling a little bit apprehensive. But I was also the first one that volunteered to go up the cliff. And I think the reason was because I was too afraid to watch anybody else go up. When I first started climbing, I got myself in a position that I couldn't quite get out of, and I didn't want to back down, and I didn't want to stop. but I couldn't go forward. And I really had to stop and think and concentrate really hard on how I was going to get myself out of the position I was in, because I was in a position where I couldn't just quit and say, forget it, because I was convinced that I was going to get to the top. And I was able to concentrate enough to change my course and find a new way up. And that was a really big stepping stone for me, because I was able to overcome an obstacle that was very real. I was clinging to a rock, and it was just me and the rock, and I knew I had to do something, because the rock didn't have a whole lot of mercy. Getting to the top was another scene entirely. It was a great feeling of accomplishment, and I was ready to climb El Capitan at that point.
The staff of the program don't point out the climbs to the students and say, there's your objective, now go get it. We're there climbing with them, holding the rope. In fact, the students hold the rope for the staff as well. We are stressing a trust and interdependence. We're stressing that faculty and students can, indeed should, work together. And it's okay to take risks, and even to look bad once in a while. Each activity is a springboard for conceptual learning in the intellectual process. A conscious and integral part of the learning by doing is the follow-up synthesis through discussions and journal writing. The fact that there were different climbing routes and compass courses with varying degrees of difficulty became a very concrete metaphor and reference point for the understanding and acceptance of individual differences. During the second half of the film, you'll be observing the manner in which these teachers transfer their learnings as they become the faculty for a 6-week summer school, which they design and carry out under our supervision. These teachers and youngsters are participating in what could be a typical school excursion. The difference here is that learning the necessary steps for taking such trips, and more importantly, how to weave the experiences into the curriculum back in the classroom, are skills, and they require training. It is the development of these skills which is the primary focus during this phase of the program. Our faculty works collaboratively with teachers in drawing upon the wilderness and planning stages to develop learning units which begin with immersing students in direct personal ways with aspects of the actual life in and around their community. In the example here, we see youngsters who live near the sea but had not examined this immediate environment closely. The teacher's first goal, then, was to have the kids become as involved with tugboats as they themselves had with the activities such as orienteering. So some kids talked with the tugboat captain, others actually turned the wheel. They all felt the boat move through the water, smelled the sea, saw the drawbridge rise. And the impetus was provided for the second goal, the follow-through learning in the classroom. Readings, discussion, and drawings of tugboat life were greatly facilitated through the shared common experience. And equally as important to us, teachers were able to apply their recent experience and training directly.
When we got out in the canoes, and it was the boys had a canoe and the girls had a canoe, and all of a sudden they had a freedom they hadn't had before, in that they could take off, they could go to point over by the rocks. The girls didn't have to follow them. They had a whole lake. They could explore any area they wanted to. And I think we all found that exciting, the teachers as well as the students. And by going out to Mendham's Pond, we knew we wanted to pick up materials for weavings. First we talked about sticks, and they weren't in the least bit interested about sticks. That was no fun. And then the more we started looking, some sticks were brown, some were red, some were white. And all of a sudden each one had a little bit more value to it. How would that look in my weaving? Well, red one might look nice, so we don't see white ones very often. And I think they did, and I did too, acquire a little bit more appreciation for things around us. They could have built little cardboard looms, or I had a loom, and each one could have taken a turn, but somehow for each one of them to actually construct a loom, maybe they'd never seen a loom before, they didn't know exactly what a loom was going to do, but they were anxious to build, they wanted to construct something, and after it was finished, what am I going to do with this thing? That they wanted to learn to weave by this point. They had invested time and energy into it, and the weaving became something they were anxious to do. They wanted to learn the parts of warp and a weft, and how can they use these pieces now? They seem to have a lot more importance than if we had placed a loom in front of them.
It's easy to say that experiential education is learning by doing, but there's much more. It's being able to set up events knowing that any one of a dozen teaching moments may arise. Hiking up Mount Major with the kids brought that out. When Brenda's pack got to be too much for her, we were confronted with the issue of how to cope with the, quote, slower students. Some of the group helped to share a load, and eventually we all got to the top. The kids' typical initial response of, "What's the matter with her?" turned eventually to the common joy of accomplishing something worthwhile together. Then, as it was a very hot day, water became an issue, especially as there were no streams along the way. This in turn led to spending several days back in the classroom in a study of the water cycle. Additionally, there was the quality of the relationship which youngsters develop with their teachers.
It's kind of hard to learn from someone if you really don't know about them, you know. You can call the teachers by their first names, and they're not really teachers. They're more like friends by the time you get to really know them. Oh, well, we were living together, all of us, for about 3 days, and you're bound to know something about somebody by the end of 3 days, We learn about what they like to do, what their habits are, what they like to eat, because they packed what they wanted to eat,
Right, I remember Eric on the backpack trip took beaver, and Julie took zucchini.
Yeah. Did you know that beaver tastes like fish?
A lot of other things happened on the mountain with the maps and the compasses and looking out at the islands and finding yourself on a map. It was amazing to me that we could look at the map and then 15 minutes later I could ask where Mount Major was on the map, and the kids would look at the map and they'd be looking all over the map to try and find Mount Major. By the time we were on the way down, I asked them where Mount Major was, and they looked at the map and they still weren't quite sure, and I said, well, what did we see from up on the mountaintop? Well, we saw those islands. Well, what was the name of that one island? Well, it was Rattlesnake Island. What was the shape of that island? It was shaped like a rattlesnake. They said it looked more like an alligator, but at any rate, they had it, and they could find that on the map. They could find that island, and then they could find Mount Major. So they learned about looking for things that were familiar.
These learning situations are more than just field trips. Most of the field trips we're familiar with are the ones where kids go to museums or maybe an aquarium, sort of a live TV program. They can watch, but they can't touch or do. But when you go to the ocean and wade into the tide pools with the kids, knee-deep in the fundamental ooze where they can tickle crabs and feel the kelp, maybe even have a bite to eat, then learning becomes three-dimensional.
We liked it when we went to Odeon's Point.
Yeah, that was fun wading through all the tide pools and hunting for the petrified forest. Just the fun of looking around in the tide pools, finding all the little starfish and the little crabs, especially touching the sea anemones, because sometimes they were open and you touch them and they pulled right back up and they were really mushy.
I really like it when I can see the connections between what we've got and what we're doing with it, where we fit into the world. Plants live in a community, and we live in a community, and it's important that we think about where the things come from and what we do with them. The jars that we were using were made of sand. And we talked about that, and the kids were really surprised to think about sand being melted down and made into glass. We started out getting the jars from the recycling center, things that had been created, and then taking them and building something out of it. So then we went to the greenhouse, and we saw the plants there, and the kids put rocks in their jars and went out to the old college woods and put plants in it. It was the beginning of a continuum, and it's a continuum through experience.
The program you have seen initially provides an atmosphere which enables teachers to translate their direct personal learning into their own teaching. It then provides training and working collaboratively to plan and implement experiences which impel students into learning. Reports over several years from participants, now in their own school settings, clearly indicate the following results. They feel a sense of self-confidence and competence, which has allowed them to act upon their learnings. Their direct experience with individual differences has influenced their teaching approach toward a more democratic, interactive style. And they've been able to transfer in varying degrees the experiential process.
The entire summer was one big rock cliff, and it scared me every inch of the way, but it was extremely satisfying and rewarding to climb over the top and have the summer behind us.